In Print Radio. In Print is a professional writers organization located in Rockford, Illinois. We're dedicated to providing resources and education off the page and on the air. Hello, I'm Bob Francis. Today, In Print member Sharon Boehlefeld sits down with author Lu Clifton.
Welcome to the show. Lu Clifton, who is a writer of books of both children and adults, is a native of Oklahoma. I do know that one of the interesting things is that there are a couple of maps of Oklahoma that you can get, and when we've gone into the state to visit relatives, you can get one that shows all the Indian nations.
Yes, you can. I have one.
How has that influenced your writing? Has it in any way?
Well, yes, my mystery novel is set in southeastern Oklahoma. My protagonist is Detective Sam Chitto of the Choctaw Nation Police, and it deals with ritual killings there on sacred sites in Oklahoma. Not just the Choctaw Nation, but other nations as well.
Now, that novel is not your first novel, I don't believe.
No.
Why don't we talk a little bit about how you did get into writing?
I started seriously in writing after I left my full-time paying job and didn't know exactly where I wanted to focus as far as genre or even age group. So I decided to just try several things. My first novels, adult novels, were two mysteries, the first and second, in a series which are in a drawer and will remain there forever because they are just that bad. And my first literary novel is the same. It's in the same drawer because my agent that handled Freaky Fast Frankie Joe also handled adult work, which is why I wanted to go with him. But he refused to handle it. He said, put it on the shelf, which is a polite way of saying write something new. So I did. So I wrote another adult novel, literary, which he liked. But we got some editorial feedback that indicated that maybe I needed to do some revision. But at the same time, Freaky Fast Frankie Joe was taking off, so I didn't get back to that literary novel until just recently. And just this last week, I circulated it to 3 university presses because they tend to be more favorable towards literary novels. So we'll see how that goes. But I didn't think I would be good at writing children's novels because I have 2 married sons, but neither of them gave me grandchildren, so I'm not really around children. But I decided to give it a try. And lo and behold, I really like writing for children. I don't know why I write for the age group I do, which is for basically 5th and 6th graders, what they call tweens these days. They're not children, but they're not teenagers, so they're tween, they're in between. But I heard something just recently that a writer tends to migrate in their writing towards places and times that made an impression on them. So I don't know if I write for 5th graders because I emotionally plateaued there, but I write about Oklahoma, of course, because that's where I'm from. But that's where I tend, now that I'm kind of established, that's where I set my novels, my adult novels. And as far as my children's books, I focus on tweens.
Now, I know in your first children's book, your Freaky Fast Frankie Joe, that you started the book in Texas.
Laredo,
yes.
Texas.
Why did you pick that spot?
Because I was familiar with that area, for one thing, and I like to be familiar with an area because you can do a better job of describing it realistically. I wanted the boy to be as far away from northern Illinois as you could get, and boy, Laredo is pretty far away. It's right on the the U.S. border. So I just chose that because I was familiar with it and because it was such a long distance from northern Illinois.
And then he does move to northern Illinois. How did you happen to pick your location for his northern Illinois home?
I think I was writing my own story because when I moved here, it was a pretty big shock because I wasn't used to the cold fronts that come down from Canada, and also I wasn't used to all that corn.
Yes.
I had never seen soybeans growing before, so it was a real education for me. So I just kind of envisioned this child, this boy who was picked up and transplanted. In the book, I talk about it being like an alien planet, and it was for me. So I just put him in my place. And so that way I could write from experience and write realistically. So that's how he ended up in Northern Illinois.
How did he, now that's how he got there geographically. How did he get there as far as actually making the move in his personal life?
Physically, you mean the drive, or?
No, I'm talking about why he came from Texas. I mean, I have read the book,
yes.
and I don't want to give away a whole lot of the plot, but he has a reason that he has to move from Texas to Illinois.
Yes, he does, and I have no problem sharing what that reason is. He didn't have a choice. His mother was arrested and put in jail for, I think it was 10 months, and so he had no other guardian there, and so his father was the only choice that he had as far as where to live. So his father came down to Laredo and got him, but he didn't know his father at all. He hadn't seen him that he knew of since he was born, and only knew him through birthday cards that he received regularly from the father.
And his mother did make sure he got those.
Most of the time, except for maybe the last couple, and he made that discovery after he got to Illinois.
I know this book has been honored several times, and that it is still in the running for more honors in school libraries and in state lists of good books for young children to read. And the key plot element, I guess, the thing that gets everything moving, is in fact his mother's arrest. One commentary that I read suggested that you're one of the few people who has even broached this topic in young children's literature. What prompted you to write about that?
I believe in writing realistic fiction, and I did volunteer work in the public schools and the after-school programs, as a matter of fact. And in my book, you'll find that there is an after-school program. Again, I'm writing about things that I know. And you would be surprised at the situations children are in today. That's not an unusual situation for children. They are dealing with a lot more than I had to deal with as a child, and I had a very disruptive childhood. And so it just seemed a good kickoff for the story to put him in, to give him a history and to make him real, because in life, real people deal with baggage, and they deal with heartache, and they deal with sorrow and loss, and that goes for children too. And they have to learn to cope with that. And so this is what Frankie Joe goes through.
I found it interesting when I read it. I read it before I gave it to my granddaughters for Christmas last year, that he seemed like an independent young man. He develops his own business. I mean, he finds ways to take care of himself emotionally and I guess socially also. Can you tell a little bit about how you developed that character?
I try to get to know my characters. My characters don't come to me full-blown. You know, I get a glimpse of them, and then over time they develop into flesh and bone people with a story to tell. I start thinking about the character and get to know him and get to know his story, and then he develops for me, and he developed in that way. He was independent down in Texas because he was given a lot of freedom. His mother didn't make him go to school regularly. He developed friends, one of whom liked to go out in the desert and explore the desert, and he did too, so he would ride his bike out into the desert alone sometimes. So he was a very independent boy from the very beginning. So when he got up here to Illinois and he found things not to his liking, he became independent. His independent streak came out, and he started making decisions on his own on how to deal with that, with his problems.
I do recall one of the things that came up in terms of the family dynamic was that making decisions on his own didn't always seem to go along with what his father and his stepmother would have chosen for him.
Not at all. No, they had 4 sons of their own. So Frankie Joe was dealing not only with a father he didn't know and his stepmother he didn't know existed, but 4 half-brothers he didn't know existed too. So it was a pretty traumatic situation that he was dropped into. And they had a pretty normal, if there is such a thing, normal family life, very well established. The father had high expectations of them scholastically, and Frankie Joe was not a scholar by any stretch, and he wasn't used to adhering to rules, and his father laid down rules immediately, and so that was really hard for him to accept.
Was this element of the family's character and the individual's characters something that you plotted out as a writer ahead of time, or did this develop as you were writing the story itself?
You know, both plot and character are cumulative processes for me. I don't think that far ahead. I'll start with a germ of an idea, but then over time it grows, and I will go back and as something is revealed to me by the character or his story, and I will make revisions to the story based on what I learned about him and his story.
How long did it take you to do Frankie Joe?
Probably, I would say not more than a year. I typically work on 2 books a year, an adult book and a children's book. And I try to have the first draft of both of them done within a year.
So you don't necessarily work on each of them every day? You might work on one day and another day? Or how do you schedule your writing time?
I will work on one until I feel I need a break, and then I will go to the other one. Sometimes it's good to take a break and get away from your story for a while, because you come at it with a freshness and a new eye, and you can reread what you've written and see what's working and what's not working for the character and his story.
Stay tuned for more of Sharon's interview with Lutricia right after this. We're back with Sharon Boehlefeld talking to Lutricia Clifton on In Print Radio.
I'd like to get back to character a little bit, because that's one of the things I was hoping we could focus on, character development. I know that you have an adult novel that's going to be coming out soon, or is that one still in the shopping phase? I forget.
It's being shopped.
Okay.
The mystery novel is being shopped.
Okay.
And I'm shopping the literary novel myself. And the reason for that is because an agent will only handle one book at a time. And so if you have multiple books that you want to get published, it leaves it up to the writer to try to get those other books published. So most agents will want to see your strongest work, and that's what they will focus on. Any other book, it's up to you.
That's a good tip for people to know, because I think many of our listeners may not be aware that an agent will only handle one book at a time. But I let us get sidetracked, and I'd like to get back to character. In the other novels, and there's another youth novel as well that you're working on, there are different characters that you have introduced. How have you developed each of them? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about somebody from each of the books.
Well, for all of them, I try to give them a history. And my new book that's coming out next spring, which is called Immortal Max, and Max, by the way, is a dog, I have diverse characters. I have the main character is a 12-year-old boy. He's just turned 12. And he and his friends are just leaving elementary school. It's summer. One of his friends is Chinese American, a girl who is Chinese American. One of the boys is from India. One of the girls is African American. And then a girl across the street is your common, everyday, as ordinary as apple pie girl. But she has a weight problem. And so her goal is to become a designer. But her mother wants her to lose 20 pounds, and so all 3 of the girls join the cheerleading squad that summer and go to cheer camp. So, that presents issues and with the girls, and their backgrounds influence that, because cultures bring their own rules for their children. For example, Chinese American parents want their children to excel scholastically. The boy from India is the same way. They're the brainiacs in the class. And then the other children in the book, or young people in the book, are not so scholastically inclined, but they just want to have a good time. So that brings a mix to the whole group. And of course, then there's the antagonist, who's another boy entirely, who tries to wreck everything. So each one of those are developed as individual characters.
Can I ask you a question about how you literally do this process? Do you take notes about each of the characters? Do you prefer to do it on your computer, longhand?
Computer. I really do. I work on a laptop, but I have it connected to a flat screen monitor, and I do my writing on the monitor, but I keep the laptop open to like a word search program. So if I'm looking for, say, example, an authentic Chinese American surname, I will go out and research Chinese American surnames or Indian surnames and things like that, and customs, so that I'm not having to stop my writing and close down everything. It's a work in progress live as I'm writing.
That's interesting. You do incorporate your research then almost instantly as you need it.
Yes.
Have you done any other kind of research?
Yes.
How does that work for you?
I call that secondary research. I have a business background, so I'm familiar with primary research and secondary research. Secondary research is where you rely on paper sources or documents and things like that. And I do that live, because I'm using the internet a lot. But I also will, if I'm researching things like the Choctaw Nation, which I've been gone from there a long, long time, and so I had to go out and research Choctaw myths and legends, and I knew nothing about the organization of the Choctaw Nation Police Department. So I will research what I can and set up both digital and paper files and keep those handy as reference. As far as primary research, though, it's important sometime to talk to a real live body. And so when I'm doing, for children's books, when I'm doing book signings at Barnes & Noble, and when I'm through reading, I will actually interview children. And the new book that's coming out next spring, called Immortal Max, refers a lot to an interview I did at Barnes & Noble last year. I interviewed an 11 and a 12-year-old girl who filled me in on things like hairstyles and clothing, what the favorite clothing of the time was, and on when they could start to date, and what making out means to them. So all those things appear in the next book. So that's really valuable when you can get it, face-to-face with a live person. I also felt the need to do that with my mystery novel, which is set in Oklahoma. And I found hardly anything about the Choctaw Nation. They're very close-mouthed about their organization online. So I called and told the receptionist or the person on the phone who I was, what I was doing, and asked who I should talk to. She referred me to the director of law enforcement, who is the equivalent of chief of police. But there's only one chief in the Choctaw Nation, and that's the chief of the nation.
Right.
So he's the equivalent of the chief of police, but he's called director. So she connected me, and he was just so forthcoming. And I found out later why, because I introduced myself and told him where I was born in Oklahoma. And we started talking, and he filled me in on the organization, right down to the color of their clothing. He actually emailed me a picture of their patrol car so I could describe it accurately. He described the roles of the field lieutenants and the field officers, and I thanked him, and I was ready to go, and he says, wait a moment. He said, your last name is Clifton, and you said you were from, he named the town. I said, yes. He said, I was born there too. So we immediately had a close contact because he knew my family and I had heard of his. So he's just been invaluable as a primary resource. We email, he sends me information. So you need both primary and secondary resources when you're writing.
The adult novel, the mystery, is completed, right?
Yes, it is. It's being circulated right now. I have a new literary agent handling just adult mystery. And she's shopping it. They call shopping it right now.
Do you intend it to be a series?
Yes, I do.
Do you? So
I do.
Are you working on the second one
I've
yet?
started the second one. I have. The first one is called Scalp Dance, and the second one is called The Bone Picker. And those are based on either Choctaw myth or legend and or old practices. And I won't say any more about that.
Oh, that's a mystery for the readers to
That's right.
unfold, right? Who is your main character? You mentioned his name and I forget.
Sam Chitto.
Right. He's the equivalent, the director of police?
No, he's a field lieutenant.
Okay.
And he's field lieutenant for District 9. Because I made this contact with the director of law enforcement, I can speak accurately about the organization, which is good because it makes your writing more realistic. And for a writer, it really boosts your confidence to know that you're accurate. But he is the field lieutenant for District 9, which is set in Durant, Oklahoma, which is right down on the Red River, right across from Texas. He also, from time to time, has responsibilities in other districts, so he moves around the entire Choctaw Nation. And would you like to know something about him as a character? Or,
yes.
Well, it opens with him being called to the scene of an incident. He has a problem with names. So because he moves around all the districts, there's 10 and a half counties in the Choctaw Nation, and there are 12 districts within those 10 and a half counties. And each one has a field officer. And because he has a problem with names, he started calling each one of these officers by their district number. So the officer he's working with on this particular incident, he calls 8, because he's the field officer for District 8. Okay? I'll start reading from a little bit that gives you insight into his character. 8 paused as he opened the door, sniffing the inside of the cruiser, and grinned. "It smell like cigarettes in here to you?" Cheeto smiled too. "That's just nostalgia you smell," he said. "Now get the hell out of my car." 8 didn't try to hide the grin as he made his way toward the 3 officers waiting next to the trailer. In fact, most people knew Cheeto kept a pack of Marlboro Reds in his glove compartment. No one knew the reason it was there or why he replaced it periodically with a fresh pack. All they knew for certain was that he had given up smoking 4 years before, cold turkey. He had traded smokes for chewing gum, though, bought a 12-pack of Double Mint weekly and stored it next to the Marlboros. His habits had made Cheeto the butt end of jokes, not to mention earning him a reputation for being somewhat eccentric, all of which sloughed off his back like a duck shedding water. Now he pulled a stick of gum from the glove compartment and folded it into his mouth. The truth was, not a day went by when he didn't want to pull out a cigarette instead, maybe 3 or 4, but he didn't. He kept the Marlboros there as a reminder of a promise he'd made and intended to keep. The aroma of tobacco served to remind him that, whatever else his shortcomings, he was a man of his word.
I like that. I definitely want to read the whole thing when it's ready for publication. One of the things that I noticed listening is that you didn't tell me anything about what the man looks like. You told me about him and how he acts and how he thinks. Is that typical of how you try to develop your characters?
Yes. And, I think there's a trend today in writing to move away from the detailed description of characters and to let the reader form an image in their own mind of the characters. And so I will mention later on that maybe he's as tall as someone else, and that person is maybe 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. So you get a picture of him by illusions, basically, or by an inference, if you will. But I don't go out and say he's 6 foot tall and his hair is dark brown or black and he wears it in a burr cut or things like that. Because I think the reader likes to form an image in their mind of what that character looks like.
Do you have an image in your mind of who he is? Can you see him when you think about him?
Oh, sure. I have a picture of him in my mind.
Does it come out of your development of the character, or do you see somebody and then in your mind and try to find out who he or she is?
I think it just forms, and that cumulative process that I described earlier, mm-hmm. I think it forms as I get to know that character better. He has a history. Like I say, I try to give my characters a history. Mm-hmm. As you can tell from the reading, he's trying to kick a cigarette habit, but he's replaced it with something else.
Right.
And there's a reason why he gave up cigarettes, because he made a promise to someone. So that is slowly revealed through the novel. I don't reveal that all at once. And that also helps you get to know the depth of the character.
We'll be back with more of Sharon's interview with Lutricia right after this. Welcome back to In Print Radio. I'm Bob Francis. Sharon Boehlefeld is talking with author Lutricia Clifton.
When you created Sam, did he initially present himself as within a story, or did you have the story first and needed Sam to create the answer to the mystery? What came first, the chicken or the egg, the plot or the people?
The people always come first, because the people have the story. And that's the way I look at it, which is not to say that you can't be doing some research, too, because I did. Reading up on the Choctaw Nation and the nations across Oklahoma, I ran across an interesting piece of research which helped to develop his story. He's a very dedicated police officer, but he's despairing because of the justice system. It's not working well for a lot of the people in his region, especially women. And so I ran across a piece of research that showed that state laws had been passed in the last few years to educate women on rape and domestic abuse. And so I bring that into the story, and it adds depth. The first character in this incident he meets is a girl that's been raped. And so that really is the trigger for him, and the story and the ending, which is rather a surprise ending, but it all develops out of his character. The ending develops out of him as a person. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It does, because it makes me believe that when I get a chance to read the whole novel, I may not really see what's coming. That he can make a decision that I presume I'm going to understand completely because I know him well enough by that point. But I might not have thought that was the decision he would have made.
Exactly.
Well,
and I won't say anything else.
No, that's fair. I think that's fair. How about in the development of the adult series, did you decide you wanted to set novels in Oklahoma and within the Indian nations? How did you get that sort of general picture of where you wanted to go with the adult mystery?
Well, again, back to what draws a writer to a particular time or a particular place, I've always been intrigued because I did a lot of genealogy research on my own family history. And I've always been interested in mythology. As a matter of fact, I wrote my master's thesis on the death of the pastoral myth and used another writers as the basis for that. And so I've always had an interest in that. And so I incorporate Native American myth and legend in each one of these books. And so I think it was just a natural migration for me to go there and to incorporate what I already had studied and knew into the novel.
I noticed that you have a male protagonist here as your main character, and your children's novels both seem to, the second one seems to have a group of kids, boys and girls, but obviously your first one, Freaky Fast Frankie Joe, is about a boy. And I wonder if you make a conscious decision to use male characters as your sort of main characters. A lot of women who write mysteries use women characters.
Yes, they do. And by the way, the second children's book that comes out next spring also has a male protagonist. And his name is Sam, too. Oh. Sam Smith, Sammy Smith, actually. Okay. And it just fit the story. I mean, this is the character that presented himself to me and told me his story. But I'm working on a new children's book now because I just got the galleys for my book coming out next spring this week, so it's done. Basically, it's done. So I'm working on the second in the mystery series and a new children's book. But this book has a girl protagonist, so it just depends on the character who I get this glimpse of this character, and then before I know it, that character is telling me that story.
Can you give us any hint about where this young lady's going to be going?
Well, she's in Texas.
Okay.
Again, because it's familiar territory for me, and I hope to develop that into a series also. But she's from a broken home, and her mother is very successful in the business field, and her father and mother separated because her mother had professional goals that her father did not agree with. So he left and became a blue-collar carpenter that travels around to state parks in Texas on a contract basis. And so she's joining him for the summer because her mother is taking a management class in Europe and can't take her with her. So the introductory book is about her and her father and their first state park, where she has an adventure, let's put it that way, which involves a little bit of mystery.
That sounds like fun.
It is fun.
Is this going to be the state park series? Is that how you're envisioning it, or do you know yet where you're going to take it?
It will be happening in state parks around Texas because, again, that's my stomping ground, so to speak. And so I prefer staying in territory that I know pretty well. And it opens in the Texas Panhandle area. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but there's a state park there called Paladura Canyon. It's the second largest canyon in the United States next to the Grand Canyon.
Oh, really?
But people don't know about
No.
it. It's shadowed by the Grand Canyon, and it's just kind of hidden away and remote. But I grew up going to that canyon on weekends with my family. And so that it was natural for me, again, to start in that state park.
Oh, I think that sounds fun.
It is.
I'm looking forward to it. So you write them, and I buy them for my grandchildren.
That's wonderful.
So that's why I get to read them. The character in the Max story, did you bring a little bit about that, just to go back to our sort of theme of character? Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about if Max is the dog, who's the human character?
Let me just read you the back flap cover. Okay, which I just got this week from my editor, and she gave me permission to talk about it. So it's, I'm doing things all legal here.
Good.
Okay, the name of this is Immortal Max. 12-year-old Sam dreams of owning a pedigree puppy, convinced they are superior to a mongrel like Max, the family's ancient pet. Smelly, disheveled, hugely affectionate, Max is a walking miracle who was near death's door when Sam's sister rescued him. But Max survived and now seems immortal, which is too bad, since Sam's mother says no new dog if it's going to bother Max. Undaunted, Sam decides to earn money to buy a puppy anyway and takes a job walking dogs in Countrywood, the fancy gated community in his rural town. There he clashes with Justin, a rich, pampered Burby who is determined to get Sam fired. Their feud, echoing the conflict between wealthy city transplants and the townies, escalates into violence.
This sounds like it's going to be just as interesting as your first one.
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. What is it about Sam? How is Sam different, say, than Frankie Joe?
Can I read some more?
Yeah.
It's just a couple of paragraphs.
Sure.
Here. This is the opening chapter. Come on, guys, hurry up. The clock ticking, time running out. I'm waiting for my turn, and the other kids are taking their sweet time. There's just this one last thing to do before summer vacation starts, and it's almost time for last bell. I'm always next to last. Justin comes after me because his last name's Wysocki. Mine's Smith, Sammy Smith. But mostly I'm called Spammy Smith. Why? Because that's how my cute baby sister pronounced it when she was learning to talk. My clever older sister made it my nickname. Sam became Spam. Spam became Spammy. Chopped ham in a can.
I want to meet Sammy Spammy, too. I think this is going to be a great story. It made me think about something, though, while you were reading it. Now, that's first person. We're seeing it from Sam's point of view. How do you make the decision? How are you comfortable writing? Are all your pieces first person? I can't remember. I didn't think so.
No. Actually, Freaky Fast Frankie Joe started out third person. And I went through this trial and error period of finding a home for Frankie Joe. First signed a contract on the book with Putnam's Books for Children. It was contingent on me rewriting it from third to first. The senior editor at Putnam's wanted to see it in first person. So being a new writer, I said, sure, I'll do that. Well, it's a big job, let me tell you, to change point of views in a story. It's like writing the story all over again. And I was not comfortable at first writing in first person, but it seemed to work, and I liked it because you're really in the head of the child. And I think children's books today, a lot of them are written in first person for that very reason, because children really get into the head of the character, and that's good. So it worked, even though the editor at Putnam's lost his job. A month later, my book was canceled, but then Holiday House picked it up, and it went. So I had become accustomed to writing in first person and thought it felt right for that aged child. So my other books are written in first person, all my children's books. My mystery novel is written in third person, as is my literary novel, because I like that objective distancing you can get with third person, because you can bring in that omniscient narrator at times to expand on that character without involving the character, so you can provide a lot more background objectively. One
of the things that some other writers and I have talked about occasionally has been, how do you determine consistent third-person character, or how do you switch third-person character during the course of the story without confusing the reader? In your adult novels, do you stay omniscient? Do you stay
Pretty
focused
much.
on
Yeah.
everybody in the pantheon of characters?
I think I stay pretty much omniscient. I'll have to go back and read and see just how I do handle that. But I only get into the head of the protagonist. I build the other characters through actions and dialogue. But I get into the head of the character to give history and background and where he's coming from.
How about structure in terms of stories? One of the things we talked about, the in-print book club, that writers as readers talked about a book that was structured very unusually recently. It's called Beautiful Ruins, and it starts out as a really conventional, beautifully descriptive narrative, and that's the first chapter. And the second chapter turns into a jarringly contemporary third-person chapter. And then later on there's sequences where a character is pitching a movie, and there's a draft version of an autobiography. I mean, throughout the entire book, the presentation of information and characters changes constantly. Your books are more traditional in terms of structure, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they are, and for a reason. One of the things that I was criticized for with Freaky Fast Frankie Joe was that it was episodic, which means it read like an episode, and then it jumped to another episode, and then it jumped to another episode. And that was jarring, the editors felt, and my agent also, felt that was jarring for that age reader. And so I had to make it flow more smoothly and chronologically so that there was not that jarring effect. So you have to take your reader into mind when you're writing. And I do that with my mystery book too, because I think in genre writing that's expected. I think in literary novels you will find that different kind of structure, plot structure, is what you're talking about. Right. And you'll bring in a lot of different ways to point to the plot that's extraneous to where you start. But I don't write that way. I write in a more traditional way. Even my literary novels are not episodic. I try not to make them too episodic.
We'll be back with more of Sharon's interview with Lutricia right after this. We'll be back with more of Sharon's interview with Lutricia right after this. We're back with Sharon Boehlefeld talking to Lutricia Clifton on In Print Radio.
What can you tell us about the literary novel? We've referred to it several times, but we haven't really talked about the nature of the story.
Actually, it's written in 3 points of view, and it starts in Texas with a man going to Oklahoma, and his mother has called him home to handle an issue with his grandfather, who is very old, 87 to be exact, but she hasn't told him what the problem is with Grandpa. So the other character is a woman character who is the rural route mail carrier, but she's a former college professor in Norman, Oklahoma, who specialized in deconstructive language. In other words, she would look at language and writing, typically literary writing, and deconstruct it. Deconstruction is very big in universities today. And he's a carpenter, a blue-collar carpenter. His mother is a kitchen beautician. In other words, she runs a beauty shop out of her home and very proud to be an independent businesswoman. And then you have the love interest, so to speak. And so the mystery focuses on the grandfather and his problem. But the real story involves the way these three characters, because of dealing with the grandfather's problem and the mystery there, come to terms with their own problems. They're carrying some baggage that they haven't been able to shed themselves, and they all Well, for example, the rural route mail carrier is a recovering alcoholic, and she almost falls off the wagon before the end of the book because their lives are just turned upside down. So it's a story of how they face up to their own problems and survive.
That also sounds interesting.
And the title of this is
Yes.
Seeking Grace in Beulah Land.
Okay.
And it has double meaning because the mystery in the book revolves around a woman named Grace who disappeared years ago. And Beulah Land in the Bible Belt refers to heaven on earth. But Seeking Grace in Beulah Land also refers to the three characters trying to seek absolution for past errors and judgment.
I hope you get that one published soon.
Oh, me too.
One of the things that I know about you is that you have gone the conventional route. You have not self-published. You've worked through agents and through publishers who take things from agents. Why did you decide to go that traditional route?
I did decide to go traditional publishing intentionally because I didn't want to handle the business end of things. I wanted to focus on writing. I was only able to start writing seriously after I left my full-time job. So I felt like I didn't want to put that much time into learning a new business, which I knew nothing about the publishing industry. And I didn't want to self-promote myself. I have a marketing background. I worked in marketing for high-tech companies, with scanners and printers and fax machines, semiconductors even. So I know how to market products, but it's very different when you start looking at marketing yourself and your book, because your book is your baby. I took it very personally when someone called my baby ugly. So I had to learn to deal with rejection, just like all writers do. So I wanted that distance between me and the business end of it. And two, as I started learning about the business, I liked what traditional publishing brought to the table, which was you got to work with an in-house editor. And I thought that made for stronger work. And they also did their own promotion, so I wasn't having to market myself. And they do advanced promotion. And they assign you a publicist to work with you. And, for example, Holiday House puts out books, they're called ARCs, Advanced Reader Copies, to review firms and companies such as Kirkus Reviews, Book List, and they also submit the book to contest. For example, they have a list of over 130 contests, and they submit that book to every contest that it's appropriate for. And so my book has done really well with reviews and also with earning some honors, as you mentioned before. 4 state library associations have placed it on their master list. And for children's books, librarians are the target market. They're the ones who buy the books and stock them in the libraries. And once a book makes it to a master list, the libraries in that state are bound to stock that book. So it ensures sales.
I wasn't aware of that part of it. And you have not had to manage that part of the sales process.
No. The one thing they didn't do was to write a press release. So having a marketing background, I certainly knew how to do that. So I did write a press release, and I circulated it to local newspapers and to regional ones, too, back in Texas. And it got really good response. And it was because it was not a self-published book. I hate to say that, but I was told that by more than one of the newspaper editors, is that so many books are being self-published today that it's rare to find one that's a writer that goes through the traditional process.
As a newspaper editor who has done book reviews based on things that have come over our transoms over the years, I do know that you can be swamped once you let it be known that you do book reviews, or even that you print book reviews that are written by others. You do get inundated with material from people that you may never even have heard of. And I have had to occasionally make a choice on what I'll read and what I won't read and what I'll write about and what I won't write about based on where it came from. And I have in the past made that distinction based on whether it was self-published or not. I think the more I get to know the indie market, the more willing I am to look at self-published things to review, because some of them are quite good. But one of the key things I think you mentioned was the availability of an editor to work with. Based on some of the things that I've seen, that's one of the biggest drawbacks among some of the indie work that I've looked at. Not all of it. Some of it's quite good. Some people have hired editors because they want to put out the best piece of workmanship that they can. But I do think the editing process is one of the things that's overlooked occasionally with publishing. And I think it's crucial if you really want to have a long-term impact on your audience.
And I agree with you on a couple of things. First of all, I think self-publishing is becoming a very legitimate way to do your book. And I think it was last August that I think it was 5 books on the New York Times bestseller list were self-published, which speaks a lot to how far that industry has come, the self-publishing ebook industry. And so it is now, it's come into its own. But the key is that editing process. So many books that go out that are self-published don't go through that editorial regimen. So self-published authors today who are focused on going that route need to take that into consideration and either work with an editor or work with a writers group who serves as editors, because they need that objective, distanced look at it, because you can get so close to your own work you don't even pick up on typos sometimes.
You're absolutely right. It's annoying when you find them after the fact.
That's true. I've done it myself. That's why I enjoy the editing process and proofreading process, because I'm amazed sometimes at the really dumb mistakes that I make. And I have a master's in English, and I taught writing in college, at college level. So we just skim our work. We reach a point where we don't really see it. We just skim right over it.
Yeah, we know what's supposed to be there.
Right.
And we see what is supposed to be there. So
that's
yeah,
right.
That's why more eyes are good.
We'll be back with more of Sharon's interview with Lutricia right after this. Welcome back to In Print Radio. I'm Bob Francis. Sharon Boehlefeld is talking with author Lutricia Clifton.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is your actual day-to-day process, because I know you. You're a neighbor of mine, but we don't see each other that often. And I know, in part, at least I suspect, it's because you're working on your writing. How do you approach your writing as a profession?
Like a job. You know, I've worked all my life, and so I established the same routine I had when I was working. I'm at my desk at 8 o'clock or before, and I will work to a certain point, and then I need a break, either to have lunch or to go over to the fitness center and work out, and then I come back and I work some more. And I think you have to establish that routine and stick with it. You have to have resolve as a writer. You have to resolve that you're going to approach it like a job. And you have to persist even in the face of rejections and criticism, and not let it affect your self-concept, because this is the most subjective business you can be in. What one editor will love, the next editor will hate. And so you can't take it personally. And it took me a while to understand that.
Do you have a separate space or room set aside for your writing?
Yes, I do. It's an office.
You do have your own home office?
I have a home office, and it's where I write. And that's where I have my laptop set up and my flat screen monitor. I also work on a keyboard and use a mouse with my flat screen monitor, because I don't like the restrictions of a keyboard on a laptop. But it's handy to have a laptop when I'm traveling, because I can take it with me. But no, it's just, that's all it is. I have my file cabinets in there for my research, and it's just strictly a work office.
Do you use or need visual aids as you write? Do you?
No, not much. I have a vivid imagination, so I can imagine whatever character I want and what they're wearing. And although, like I say, I'm a people watcher. I think most writers are people watchers. So I will, when I'm at Barnes & Noble or when I'm at shopping, I will look at what children are wearing, what tweens are wearing. Of course, I'm observant of adults, too. And if I have a character that, if I see someone that reminds me of the character in my book, I will kind of adopt their clothing styles or their hairstyle or something like that.
So you do pull from life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself eavesdropping on conversations?
I do. And it's fun.
Do you take notes?
I do. I did an interview with a book group down in Nebraska recently, and that was one of the questions they asked me. And I showed them that I keep 2 notebooks, and I carry a small one with me in my purse. And so if I'm sitting at lunch someplace and I hear a conversation in back of me and I hear this wonderful line someone says, I'm writing it down. And then I also keep a notebook on my nightstand because my best ideas come at 2 in the morning. And so I will get up, turn on the light, and capture it right then because it may not stay with me till dawn.
You don't fret about it, though. You don't get up and go to your office and write then. You just make a note.
I just make notes, and that's it. Once it's written down, I know that I can pick it up in the morning.
Do you have a tendency to stop where you know you're going somewhere next, or do you stop at the end of a thought in terms of a scene or a chapter?
I try to stop at the end of a scene, and from day to day, the next day, as far as my process goes, I will reread what I wrote the previous day, because that's where you find that you need to develop it more as far as description or expand on the characters or better the dialogue or something like that to make it more realistic. So I will reread what I wrote the previous day, which prepares you for writing that next scene or opening that next chapter.
Do you print out your work each day, or do you read on the screen?
I read on the screen.
And you're comfortable with that?
Not always. I think that reading from paper is always better. So when I have finished the first draft, I print it out, double-spaced, with wide enough margins that I can read it and make notes. And so I spend time with that print copy, and then I go back and make edits to the digital copy.
And you try to do 2 novels a year.
I do.
And so far it sounds like you've been successful.
I do. I have drawers full of books.
How many are you not ever going to take out of the drawers?
Several. I have the 2 mystery novels I wrote initially, the literary novel that my literary agent told me to put on the shelf, so it's on the shelf. And I have a young adult novel that I might revisit one of these days. I'm just not sure that I'm comfortable writing for the older teen.
Okay, so that would be high school-ish?
Yes, high school-ish. Okay. Where they're getting into really serious kinds of dating and issues and peer pressure and things like that. I'm just not sure that I'm ready to tackle those things. Let's put it that way. I didn't plateau emotionally there. I plateaued in the 5th grade.
Well, thanks again, Lou. We really appreciate that you spent some time with us today.
It's been a pleasure.